Now comes the part where you have to approach this person that you've identified and you want to be your guide. And I know that this can feel awkward, but let's be clear. You're not going up to somebody and saying, "Will you be my mentor forever?" You're just asking to learn from their experience.
Hi, I'm Chris LeBrun, your host of the Wholistic Productivity Podcast. As someone who's never been afraid of dreaming big and going for it all, I often find myself with a lot on my plate. I'm a husband and father, a nonprofit fundraiser, and an entrepreneur. What I've realized is my view of productivity was pretty toxic. After decades of believing that in order to do more, you had to work harder, I began to see productivity as this beautiful thing. Holistic productivity is the idea that you can accomplish your professional, personal, and purpose-driven goals in a healthy way, and doing so will make you happier and more fulfilled. Join me each week as we break down myths about productivity, share practical tips for maximizing your time, energy, and focus, and hear from others about their productivity journey. This is the Wholistic Productivity Podcast.
Hello, friend. Thank you so much for being here for episode number 49 of the Wholistic Productivity Podcast. My name is Chris LeBrun. I'm a productivity coach. I'm your host, and I'm just glad that you are here for this episode. Always glad when you come around and check out what we're talking about on the podcast. Last week, we kicked off a 3-episode series on building a team that can support you on your goal journey. We looked at why teams are so important, what roles you need on your team to help you with your goal journey, and we looked at 3 specific relationships that you need to invest in right now. The first one is the guide. That's the person ahead of you. The second one is the ally. That's the person beside you. And the last one is the apprentice. That's a person who is behind you on their goal journey. Now, I'm not going to recap the whole thing here today, but you can find a link in the show notes. Go back and listen to that or watch it on YouTube if you haven't already. But don't worry, you won't be lost today if you didn't listen to the first episode in this series. But today I want to look at the guide and a little bit of the apprentice relationship. I said this last week, but if you are developing all 3 of these relationships on your team, you will play both roles. You will be an apprentice when you add a guide to your team, and you'll also be a guide when you take on an apprentice. So I want to look at that relationship because it's doubly important for you to understand it. Now, you've probably had a mentor of some sort at one time or another. Maybe it was when you were in school and it was more of a formal relationship. Maybe your guide relationship isn't all that formal, but you're still learning from somebody who is further along than you are. I got my start in fundraising eons ago through a paid internship, and I had several fantastic mentors in my career, both formally as part of that internship and informally as well. And I've probably had a few mentors in my personal life that didn't even know that they were my mentor, but I would take every opportunity I could to learn from them. And I promise there was no stalking that happened whatsoever. It was an up and up relationship. But I think for many of us, we're not quite sure how to start a mentoring relationship outside of that sort of structured program like an internship. And we certainly don't want to get into the stalking side of things. So to start, where do we even find someone to be a guide? We're going to talk about that today. We're also going to look at how to make the most of your relationship with a guide. But I want to start out by looking at some of the myths about being a mentor or a guide. And I'll use those words interchangeably. The first myth is that a mentor has to be older than you are. We think about that relationship between Luke Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi, right? Obi-Wan was this older sage Jedi compared to young Luke. But depending on what your goals are, a guide may be younger than you. Your guide only has to be 1 or 2 levels up from where you are to be an effective mentor or guide. Think about all the millennials who trained some older Gen Xers or boomers on how to use social media. For boomers, they were trying to understand something that came naturally to millennials, something that they were using on an everyday basis. So it would be obvious and natural for the mentor, the guide, to be somebody younger in that scenario. This idea of having a mentor who is just a couple of steps or levels ahead of you becomes really important when it comes to finding a guide. And that transitions into myth number 2. A lot of people think that a guide has to be wildly successful to be your mentor, that you have to be mentored from somebody who is at the top of the field. Now, that's great if you can get that, but it's probably not going to happen. And here's the thing. I've never gone fly fishing once in my life. So I don't have to ask the world's leading expert on fly fishing to mentor me. I just have to ask Harold from accounting, who goes out to Idaho every summer and fishes for a week, right? So you're not likely to have access to the wildly successful top experts in the field anyway. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't have a guide, okay? Myth number 3 is that you have to ask your guide to take you on. I did that in air quotes if you're listening to it. First of all, you're not a charity case. No one is taking you on. Secondly, we've already determined that for the guide, having an apprentice is a great way to learn. So your guide is going to benefit from this relationship as well. So you don't have to worry about making this formal commitment that this person is going to be with you till the end of time. We'll talk more about that in a little bit, but that is myth number 3. And that leads us to myth number 4, that a guide has to meet with you regularly. Sure, it might be great to sit down for coffee or lunch once a month, but maybe it's just a phone call or a text when you have a question. Maybe it's just a conversation over lunch every year at the national convention. A guide shouldn't have to miss out on family dinners and their kids' birthday parties to be your guide, so it shouldn't be an issue. Understanding the reality about these myths should make you more comfortable with the idea of having a guide and approaching them. And it also should make you feel better about being one for somebody else. So where do you find a guide? Well, this is going to differ depending on what your goals are. If it's a professional goal, your guide is going to be someone in a role that you want to grow into, or maybe the one that you're already in if you're new to that role. This is one of those benefits of network. And I know some people have really strong negative feelings about networking. For me, it's more about how some people do it that turns me off rather than the actual networking itself. Networking is hugely important, and I really do enjoy that part. But as you interact with people within your own firm or at other companies, you will start to meet people who can be your potential guides. Now, for personal or purpose-driven goals, it's the same idea. Someone who you look up to in a certain area, but it may be harder to connect with them. But I'd start with the friend group that you already have. Most people already have potential guides in their life. They just haven't identified them yet. This could be some of your friends from college, or people that you attend church with, or other people who are in clubs or organizations that you are already part of or that you can join or volunteer with. You can even leverage online groups. Again, just don't be creepy about it, okay? But there are ways to find people in those settings. The key is that you are looking for someone who is consistently doing what you want to do. I have friends of mine who are entrepreneurs that I have as guides because they are further along in that process than I am. And I can ask them what software they're using for lead generation or for CRMs or email newsletters. I recently decided that I'm finally going to get my amateur radio license, ham radio. What I love about the ham community is that they understand the power of mentorship. So they've baked this idea of having a guide right into the culture of ham radio. They call it an Elmer. That's a ham lingo. But, that is part of the process. And everywhere you look when you're studying for this test, it says, go find an Elmer. And that is a fantastic feature to build into the community. Thankfully, I have friends already who have their ham license, their amateur radio license. So I've got several Elmers in my group. These are people that I can turn to when I don't have any idea what I'm trying to learn, right? I can ask them the silly question. Now comes the part where you have to approach this person that you've identified and you want to be your guide. And I know that this can feel awkward. But let's be clear, you're not going up to somebody and saying, "Will you be my mentor forever?" You're just asking to learn from their experience. And in many cases, you don't have to make it a formal relationship with weekly check-ins. Invite them to coffee or lunch. Exchange text messages with them once in a while. It's important to be respectful of their time and be specific when you ask them what you are looking for. Request to have a short conversation with them about a certain topic. Then ask one or two thoughtful questions and always express appreciation. Here's one approach that you could use when you're going up to somebody that you want to be a guide. Say, "I really admire what you're doing with X. Could I ask you a couple questions sometime?" It's as simple as that. People like hearing that they're doing something right. That might be the day that they are struggling with whatever that thing is. And to hear that you think they're doing a good job might be a huge, ego stroke, but not in a bad way, right? That could be awesome. Remember, everyone is busy. So if you're asking for some big commitment, you're going to get shot down most likely. And that's probably fair. The other thing that you could do is just to try to make it even more awkward than it already is. I mentioned that I had several Elmers in my group. These are ham radio experts or people who've been doing it for a while. So I sent them a Valentine's card on Valentine's. And I said, "Will you be my Elmer?" And yeah, it was super cheesy. And, we laughed about it, but that's who I am, right? And that's what made it funny. And, they're probably a lot more likely to say yes in that situation because I had fun with it, because I made it even weirder than it sounds. Elmer is a weird term, I know. So now that you've made contact and established this guide relationship, how do you make the most out of it without abusing it? First off, you always have to come prepared. This is not a time to just shoot the breeze. I mean, yes, you can do that, especially if you're friends, but have thoughtful, strategic questions ready to go. And by thoughtful, I don't mean tell me everything you know about fill in the blank. Instead, try this. "I'm facing this decision or challenge, and I know you've dealt with the same thing not long ago. How did you face this decision?" Or maybe it's like this: "Is there something that you wish you'd known before you started down this path?" This is really key, this next step. After your conversation, apply what you learn. Put their advice into practice and then report back to them. People love to hear that you actually took their advice, even if you're skeptical about it, even if you're not sure that it's going to exactly work for you. But try it and then report back to them. Say, "Hey, I tried your suggestion and here's what happened." That might actually give you an opportunity, open the door to have more guide mentor conversations with them. Guides want to help. They don't want to feel like they've been used. So don't constantly ask for time. Don't expect instant responses. Don't treat them like problem solvers or only reach out when you need something from them. It's just like any other relationship. It has to have some sort of two-way benefits or give and take for everyone to want to stay in that relationship. Now, here are some powerful questions that you can ask a guide during some of your conversations with them. What do you wish you knew when you were where I am? Or what slowed you down early on? Here's another one. What mattered more than you expected? Or the opposite of that, what mattered less than you thought it would? Man, that is huge because it can save you from going down all sorts of directions and trails that don't really matter, right? That is a huge one. Here's one. What almost made you quit? Make sure that you have a good enough relationship with them to ask them that. They may not, some of this may be too personal. So make sure you're ready. The last one, what habits made the biggest difference? These are things that you can start developing. If it made a difference for them, it's likely going to make a difference for you. We're going to talk more about apprentices and that side of the relationship in the next episode. But I just wanted to make one point here about when you are asked to be a guide, because that can be a little bit unnerving, right? You can have that imposter syndrome. I know we've talked about that just a couple weeks ago. But all those myths that we talked about, they don't just apply to your guide. They apply to you as well. You don't have to be an expert. You just have to be a couple levels ahead of somebody. So don't start thinking that, wow, I don't really know how I could be of help to somebody. If somebody is looking up to you and thinking that you would make a good guide for them, allow yourself to be available to have them as an apprentice. Because being a guide for someone else isn't just going to help them, it's going to help you as well. It's going to reinforce your own learning. It's going to build confidence, and it adds purpose to your progress. The other thing that it might do is crystallize some of the things that you experienced but didn't even stop to think about. You might look back when they ask a question and say, I guess that did happen. I guess I did see this, whatever the situation is. And that will help you again in the next time that you face that same thing. So let's recap what we've talked about today. We started out by looking at some of the myths and the truth of those myths. Your guide doesn't have to be somebody older or wildly successful to be your guide. They just have to be a few steps ahead of you and be willing to share their experience with you. And you can relax because you're not asking them to take you on as a project or meet with you every single Monday. This isn't going to be some big formal relationship necessarily. Finding a guide can be as simple as looking in your own network and identifying someone you already have a relationship with, a coworker, a friend, that person you got to know at the national conference last year. And approaching them doesn't have to be a big deal either. Again, you're not proposing marriage. You're just asking for some feedback on a specific issue. When you do meet or talk on the phone or by text, come prepared. Ask specific questions that get to the heart of your issue or challenge. Then try their suggestion and report back. No one wants to think that they gave you great advice and that you never used it. So make sure you try it. Try to ask questions that go beyond solving a specific problem and focus more on the intangibles that they've felt, learned, or experienced because of the journey that they are on. Those specific problem questions, you're going to have a million of those, but get to know what helped them succeed regardless of the specific problem, and you'll be a lot further along. And here's the other thing. Answers to problems can be found on the internet, but understanding their feelings and emotions of a situation can't be taught by ChatGPT. And then be open to helping when someone asks you to be your guide. They're paying you a huge compliment, and you're also saying thank you to your guide by paying it forward to somebody else. Now, next week, we're going to wrap up this series and look at the relationships that you can build with an ally and an apprentice. You are not going to want to miss that. But just, thank you so much for being here as we wrap up this episode. Check out the show notes, wholisticproductivity.com/49. We'll have links to some of the other episodes that are in this series and other ones that we've mentioned. Do me a favor right now, whatever podcast platform you're listening on, or if you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and like, follow, and subscribe. That's going to help you get the next episode as soon as it downloads. We're wrapping up this series. It's going to be a great conclusion, and I want you to get it as soon as possible. Also, if you liked the show and found it valuable, you can always rate the show on those platforms while you're there, liking, subscribing, and following. Be sure to follow at Wholistic Productivity on Instagram, Facebook, Threads, LinkedIn, YouTube, Substack. I have a lot more inspiration, motivation, productivity tips that I share throughout the week. So look for those there. And also join the Holistic Productivity community on School. This is a fantastic way to find a mentor, find a guide, find somebody that is also interested in some of these same things that you are. A lot of great resources there, and there's people from all over the world. So you are not going to have a shortage of people that you can approach and share ideas with and network with. Again, thank you so much for listening in. I love that you are here. My goal with this podcast, as always, I talk about this all the time, is to help you dream big, plan smart, and live fully. And I am so excited that you are doing that. I can't wait to see what you are going to build with your team once you get that put together. So thank you for being here. We'll see you next time when we wrap up this series. Take care.